When Sophie looked me in the eye and called me a homeless old man, something inside me went completely still. Not angry, not shocked, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when you realize the last thread holding your family together has finally snapped. She stood there on the porch of the house I built with my own hands, waving the papers that proved she'd sold it. All those years of work, every beam and brick gone, and she didn't even blink. "I had to," she said. "Ethan's business was drowning. You don't need a house that big anyway." Then she smirked. That faint, pitying kind of smirk people use when they think they're saving you from yourself. "Don't worry, Dad. We'll make sure you have a place to stay for now." Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. That was 3 days ago. 3 days since I last walked through the front door of the place Elaine and I bought in 1985. Her piano was still in the corner. The worn rug under the dining table still had Archie's paw prints on it from that last rainy morning before she passed. Everything smelled faintly of her perfume, lilac and old paper. And now someone else would be moving their boxes into it. Sophie didn't know, of course. She'd grown up thinking her father was an ordinary man, a careful saver, maybe even a little boring. She didn't know about the quiet investments Elaine and I made in my early years designing homes across the coast. She didn't know about the accounts sitting untouched, the trust fund her mother had insisted on building for when the world forgets to be kind. I never flaunted any of it. Money changes people, and I wanted to raise a daughter who valued people more than price tags. Turns out she learned the opposite lesson all on her own. When the movers came, I didn't argue. I watched them load my life into boxes labeled miscellaneous. I took only a duffel bag and a set of old car keys, ones I hadn't touched in years. Sophie thought she'd left me with nothing, but what she really left me with was freedom. The keychain was heavy, familiar, red leather worn smooth by time. On it hung the small emblem Elaine gave me the year our first home design got published. A silver horse, prancing. Most people would have thought it was a trinket. Sophie certainly did. But behind an unmarked garage door on the outskirts of town, beneath a mojansaque dusty tarp, was something she'd never seen, something that still had life in it. I drove away that afternoon in a borrowed pickup, the sun setting behind the roofline that used to be mine. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of Sophie standing on the porch, arms folded, triumphant. She looked like someone who thought she'd won, and maybe she had for the moment. But 3 days is a long time when you've spent a lifetime being underestimated. Because 3 days later, when I came back, I wasn't the man she threw out. She thought she'd taken my home. She had no idea I was about to show her what real loss looks like. The world looks different when you're starting over. The coffee tastes stronger, the air smells cleaner, and silence, the kind I once feared, started sounding like peace. I spent that first night in a small motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the lights hum and the wallpaper hasn't been changed since the 90s. I wasn't there to stay long. I just needed somewhere to think. The next morning, I drove 30 minutes out toward the coast, where Elaine and I used to spend weekends before life got complicated. She always loved the sea, said it reminded her that even waves knew when to pull back before coming in stronger. That's where my old garage sat, a private workshop I'd kept long before Sophie was born. Inside those walls, dust covered everything, blueprints, woodwork tools in one particular shape beneath a heavy gray tarp. The air smelled like gasoline, leather, and memory. When I pulled back the cover, there she was. My other love, a cherry red Ferrari 458 Italia, untouched for over a decade. Elaine used to joke it was the only thing shinier than my wedding ring. Back when I bought it, I told her it was just an indulgence, a reward for all those sleepless nights drafting houses for other people. But she knew me better. She said, "One day this car won't be about speed. It'll be about proving something." I never understood what she meant until that moment. I ran my hand over the curved hood. The paint still smooth, though dulled by time. A layer of dust covered the emblem like age hiding potential. I grabbed a rag, wiped it clean, and the red beneath came alive again. For a moment, I could almost hear Elaine's laughter echo through the room. I turned the key. Nothing. The battery was dead, of course. But so was the version of me Sophie thought she knew. And that I could fix. I spent the next 2 days in that garage, sleeves rolled, hands black with grease and purpose. I replaced plugs, flushed fluids, polished chrome until I could see my reflection staring back. Every time the wrench slipped, I thought about Sophie's voice, cold, detached, calling me homeless. And every turn of the bolt felt like tightening something inside me too. By the second evening, the engine finally coughed. A deep, rough sound that sent vibrations straight through my chest. Then, as if waking from a long sleep, it roared, loud, defiant, beautiful. I stood there grinning like a fool, tears mixing with sweat. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was my heartbeat in metal. Elaine was right. This wasn't about speed. It was about reminding the world and my daughter that I was never small, never broken, and never done. That night I sat by the garage door, the car idling softly beside me, headlights spilling out onto the empty road. I whispered, "You ready, girl? We've got a point to make. 3 days ago she took my house. Tomorrow I'm driving something she can't put a price on, her father's pride." Morning came soft and golden, the kind of light that makes the world feel like it's waiting for something. I hadn't slept. Couldn't really. My hands ached from working through the night, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The Ferrari sat gleaming in the corner of the garage, sunlight sliding over its curves like fire on water. After years of silence, the car was alive again, and so was I. I made a pot of coffee and leaned against the workbench, staring at the prancing horse emblem on the steering wheel. Elaine had once told me that cars were like people. Some are built to be looked at, others to be understood. The 458 wasn't about showing off. It was about precision, patience, and control. 3 things my daughter Sophie had never cared for. As the steam curled above the mug, my thoughts turned to her. Sophie had always been ambitious, even as a child. When she was 10, she built a lemonade stand with a logo and a slogan. By 15, she wanted designer shoes and thought our modest home was outdated. Elaine used to smile and say, "She's got your drive, Howard, just not your brakes." Elaine saw the cracks long before I did. She'd warned me that Sophie's hunger for more would one day come back to bite her. I'd laugh it off, call it teenage vanity. But after Elaine passed, Sophie's desires became louder. Bigger houses, faster plans, a husband who talked more about investments than character. Ethan had a salesman's smile and a gambler's confidence. Together, they turned ambition into entitlement. I took another sip, bitterness cutting through nostalgia. It wasn't that I hated my daughter. No, hate is too easy. It was disappointment, the kind that sits in your bones and whispers that maybe you failed somewhere along the line. Maybe kindness wasn't the best lesson after all. I wiped my hands, pulled the tarp back one more time, and checked the details. The red paint glowed like it had been born for revenge. The tan leather interior still smelled faintly of Italian craftsmanship and old memories. I adjusted the mirror and caught my reflection. A man with silver hair, stubble rough from neglect, and eyes that had seen too much loss to still be kind. For the first time in years, I saw someone who looked like Elaine's husband again, not Sophie's disappointment. I grabbed my jacket from the hook, the same brown leather one Elaine bought me on our 10th anniversary. The sleeves had faded, the zipper a little stiff, but it still fit like memory should. On the workbench lay a small box of documents, ownership papers, land deeds, and a letter Elaine wrote before she died. I opened it once more, her handwriting as delicate as her voice. "Howard, I know you'll never stop being the better man, but someday, someone will try to make you forget who that man is. Don't fight them with anger. Show them with grace, and let them drown in their own regret." I folded the letter carefully, slid it into my jacket pocket, and whispered, "I hear you, love." Outside, the world was waking. The sky stretched wide and pale blue, the road empty except for my reflection glinting in the Ferrari's paint. I climbed in, turned the key, and the engine purred like thunder restrained by discipline. The steering wheel felt heavier than I remembered, a reminder that control comes with weight. I drove out of the garage, gravel crunching under the tires, the wind catching the edges of the tarp I left behind. The open road greeted me like an old friend, quiet, endless, honest. As I shifted into gear, the hum became a roar and the trees blurred into streaks of color. I didn't drive fast. Not yet. I wanted the road to feel me again, to remember the man who built houses by day and tuned engines by night. Every turn of the wheel brought back something I'd lost: confidence, rhythm, purpose. By the time I reached the city limits, the sun had climbed high. I parked under the same oak tree where Elaine and I used to stop for picnics. For a while, I just sat there, listening to the idle rumble, my fingers tracing the dashboard. Somewhere in that mechanical heartbeat, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. Not really, it was restoration. Not of wealth, but of self. And when I finally met Sophie again, I didn't want her to see anger in my eyes. I wanted her to see the man she forgot existed. She thought she buried me under her pride. But I was only waiting. Engine running, heart steady, ready to show her what legacy really sounds like. By the third morning, the air carried that crisp winter bite that makes every breath sting just a little. I was parked 2 streets away from Sophie's new house, or what used to be mine. From here, it looked different, colder, bigger maybe, but empty in ways money can't fill. The yard I once spent weekends trimming was now a showpiece of artificial turf. The white porch railings gleamed spotless and soulless. For a long minute, I just sat there behind the wheel, the Ferrari's engine quietly purring beneath me like a heartbeat that refused to calm down. The neighborhood had changed, or maybe I had. I wasn't here to start a fight. I was here to end one, gracefully, just like Elaine would have wanted. I turned off the ignition and stepped out, my boots crunching softly against the frosted pavement. The car door clicked shut with the kind of authority that draws eyes, and sure enough, a curtain from the neighboring house twitched open. I smiled faintly. It had been years since anyone had looked twice at me. Funny how a red Ferrari brings attention faster than kindness ever could. Before walking up to the door, I checked my reflection in the window. Gray hair combed back, trimmed beard, brown leather jacket fitting snug over a dark turtleneck. I didn't look like a man who'd been thrown out of his home. I looked like someone who'd built it. I rang the bell once. The door opened and there she was. Sophie, wearing a silk robe and holding a steaming mug. Behind her, the faint smell of new paint and perfume replaced the scent of home-cooked meals and Elaine's old candles. Her eyes widened slightly before narrowing. "Dad?" she said, more surprised than happy. "You didn't think I'd just disappear, did you?" I said softly. She stepped back but didn't invite me in. "Now's not a good time. Ethan's got a business call and you're living in my house." I interrupted gently, not raising my voice. Her jaw tightened. "Was your house. You signed it over years ago when you added me to the deed, remember?" "I remember," I said, my tone steady. "I also remember the promise you made, that you'd never sell it while I was alive." For a second, something flickered behind her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just discomfort. She hid it quickly. "You're being dramatic, Dad. You can stay at a hotel for a while. We'll figure something out later." I almost laughed. A hotel. The daughter of the man who built this home was offering him a few nights of pity at a place that charged by the week. Behind her, I heard Ethan's voice. "Is that him?" He appeared half-dressed, half-bothered, with that same smirk I'd grown used to seeing in boardrooms back when young men thought confidence was the same thing as competence. "Hey, Mr. Lane," he said, leaning against the doorway like he owned it. "I wish we could have talked this through before it all got messy. You know how finances go." "Do I?" I said. "Because last time I checked, the difference between a financial plan and theft is permission." His smirk faded, but only for a moment. "Well, the past is the past. Sophie made the call. We'll make sure you're comfortable." That word again, comfortable. I didn't want comfort. I wanted respect. I stepped back, taking in the sight of them both. They looked perfect for each other. Polished, rehearsed, hollow. "You know," I said quietly, "your mother used to tell me something about storms. That sometimes they don't destroy you. They just clear the road for your next drive." Sophie frowned. "Dad, what are you even talking about?" I smiled. "You'll understand soon enough." I turned, walking back toward the curb. The early sun hit the Ferrari just right, and the metallic red burst into life, throwing streaks of light across their spotless front windows. Sophie's voice followed me, uncertain now. "Wait, is that yours?" I didn't answer. I opened the door, slid behind the wheel, and let the engine growl to life. The sound was deep, confident, unapologetic. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Sophie frozen on the porch, Ethan's expression shifting from smugness to something else. Unease. Good. Let them wonder. Let them rethink every assumption they'd made about the man they'd written off. As I drove away, I didn't look back. Not yet. Because this wasn't about showing off wealth. It was about showing them that I'd never lost myself. They just stopped recognizing who I was. They thought I was done. They didn't realize I was only shifting gears. The drive back to the city felt lighter than it had in years. The red Ferrari cut through morning fog like a blade through silk. The hum of its engine smoother now. Controlled, confident, alive. For the first time since Elaine's passing, I wasn't thinking about loss. I was thinking about direction. Every light that reflected off the windshield carried a piece of memory. Elaine beside me laughing as I stalled this very car in the middle of Rome during our honeymoon. Sophie in the back seat as a child, holding a small toy car and asking, "Daddy, will I ever drive one like this?" Back then, I told her, "Only if you earn it." She laughed. She always laughed. But somewhere between the laughter and the years, she stopped earning. She just started expecting. By the time I reached downtown, I had a plan. I wasn't going to shame her. I wasn't going to yell or beg for what was already gone. No, I was going to teach her something her mother always wanted her to learn. That true value isn't found in what you can buy. It's in what can't be taken. I parked in front of my lawyer's office, a quiet building with glass doors that reflected the Ferrari like a mirror to my past. Inside, the receptionist looked up, startled. People always do when the person they'd written off walks back in looking like they never fell. "Good morning, Mr. Lane," she said. "Morning," I replied. "I need to revisit the terms of the Lane Family Trust." Within the hour, I was seated across from Richard, my attorney for nearly 3 decades. The same man who'd been there when Elaine and I first drafted the trust documents. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the file with that calm precision only lawyers and surgeons seem to possess. "Are we making a withdrawal?" he asked. "No," I said. "We're making an adjustment." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to cut Sophie out completely?" I shook my head. "No, that's not the lesson." He leaned back, curious. "Then what is?" I smiled faintly. "Accountability. If she wants to live in a world of ownership and deals, then let her understand what those words truly mean." I explained the changes. The trust would stay active, but control of its disbursements, the rental income, the investments, the property shares, would pass to me, indefinitely. Sophie and Ethan wouldn't see a cent unless they earned it through work with the community project Elaine founded years ago, the Lane Design Foundation. Richard chuckled softly. "That's poetic." "No," I said, "it's justice. The kind that doesn't need applause." As the papers were drawn up, I signed each one carefully, the pen steady in my hand. Every stroke felt like a quiet reclaiming of self-respect. Elaine's photo sat on the edge of my wallet, smiling faintly under the dim light. I whispered, "You'd like this, wouldn't you?" By late afternoon, the trust revisions were sealed, notarized, and filed. And as I stepped back into the crisp air, the city seemed to hum in rhythm with the car's low idle. Everything that was once taken from me was now anchored again, not through revenge, but restoration. But I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing to do, something Sophie wouldn't see coming. That evening, I parked the Ferrari outside the building where she worked. A sleek, modern office in the financial district, all glass and ambition. I watched from across the street as she stepped out, laughing with colleagues, coat draped over her shoulders. Ethan wasn't there. He was probably chasing another investment. Sophie's laughter stopped when she saw the car. She froze, clutching her purse tighter. It took her a few seconds before she realized who was behind the wheel. Her lips parted. "Dad?" I rolled the window down, the soft purr of the engine filling the silence. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. She nodded slowly, uncertain. That's yours?" "It always was," I said simply. "I just stopped needing to prove it." She looked away, embarrassed. "You didn't have to do this, showing up like this. It's petty." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it's honest. You called me homeless, Sophie. I wanted you to see what home really looks like. It's not the walls around you, and it's the dignity inside you." She blinked, words failing her for once. I didn't wait for a response. I just let the car idle, then shifted into gear. As I pulled away, the reflection of the Ferrari's taillights burned against the glass of her office windows, a streak of red cutting through her reflection. And for the first time, she saw her father not as a burden, but as a man she'd never truly known. I hadn't humiliated her. I'd simply reminded her what pride without compassion really costs. And the next day, she'd learn the rest of the lesson, in my own way. The next morning, the frost still clung to the ground when I woke up before dawn. I brewed a black coffee the way Elaine always made it. No sugar, no cream. Just strong enough to make your pulse remember you're alive. The garage light flickered to life, casting a golden glow over the Ferrari's crimson body. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a mirror, reflecting the man I'd buried beneath decades of quiet compromise. Rex, my old golden retriever, padded over and sat beside me, his cloudy eyes following as I opened the door and ran a hand along the steering wheel. "One last drive, boy," I said softly, but not for me this time. By 6, I was already rolling through the outskirts of town, the hum of the V8 slicing through the sleepy silence. Every intersection, every turn of the wheel was deliberate. Not a joyride, but a statement being written across asphalt. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. The plan was simple, but it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about clarity. Sophie and Ethan were hosting a neighborhood investor brunch that morning. One of those smug get-togethers where people who mistake luck for intelligence congratulate each other over sparkling wine. The invitation had circulated through local realtors and developers. I'd seen it because, despite everything, my name was still on the community's founding registry. A small technicality they'd forgotten to erase. When I arrived, the driveway was lined with imported cars. BMWs, Audis, a Maserati or two, but none of them had the heart or history of the machine I drove. The Ferrari 458 idled at the curb like a crimson predator among domesticated pets. Heads turned as soon as I stepped out. I walked toward the house. My old house. The same porch I'd built plank by plank with my own hands 30 years ago. The same porch Sophie had sold out from under me. The door opened before I could knock. Ethan stood there, dressed in a navy blazer, his practiced smile already cracking. "Mr. Lane," he said, "didn't expect—" "No, you didn't," I cut him off. "But I figured you could use a reminder of what real ownership looks like." The room behind him fell silent. People who'd been mid-conversation now stood frozen, wine glasses halfway to their lips. Sophie appeared near the staircase, her face pale, her voice trembling. "Dad, please, not here." "Oh, don't worry," I said calmly. "I'm not here to embarrass you, just to congratulate you." She blinked, confused. "Congratulate me?" "Yes, for teaching me a lesson I should have learned long ago. That not everyone raised with love learns to return it." A murmur spread across the room. I took a slow step forward, my boots echoing on the hardwood. "You called me homeless. Sold the roof your mother and I built to cover your husband's mistakes. I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to see what kind of person you'd become when you thought I had nothing left." Ethan scoffed. "And what, you think showing up in a fancy car changes that?" I smiled faintly. "No. This isn't about changing your opinion, it's about exposing your reflection." Outside, the Ferrari's engine purred like thunder caged in chrome. The sound drew everyone's attention to the window, where the red paint caught the sunlight and scattered it across the room like shards of fire. "That car," I said, "isn't new money. It's old integrity. I bought it the year you graduated college, Sophie. Not to show off, but to remind myself that hard work should mean something. But I never flaunted it because wealth without grace is just noise." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, her posture collapsing under the weight of what wasn't said. "I didn't know, Dad," she whispered. "You never told me." "Because," I said softly, "real wealth doesn't need to be announced. It's lived. It's shared. And sometimes it's silently endured." Ethan tried to speak again, but his words faltered. The crowd had turned from admiration to discomfort. You could feel it. That subtle social shift when pretense cracks and truth seeps through. I took one last look around the home I'd built, the walls now echoing with emptiness disguised as elegance. "You can keep the house," I said, turning for the door. You've already filled it with enough cold air. Sophie reached out, her voice shaking. Dad, please! But I was already outside. The Ferrari roared to life, the sound drowning out the brittle murmurs from behind the glass. I eased it into gear, sunlight gleaming across the hood, and pulled away slow enough for every single one of them to hear the harmony of precision and power, the sound of dignity leaving quietly with class. Through the mirror, I saw Sophie on the porch, hand over her mouth, eyes wet. Ethan stood beside her, small now, a man watching something greater than himself disappear into the horizon. I didn't wave. I didn't look back. Again, because forgiveness doesn't always need an audience. She thought the Ferrari was the ending, but it was only the prelude to what real redemption looks like when pride learns humility the hard way. For the next few days, the phone didn't stop ringing. First came the calls from Sophie. I didn't answer. Then from Ethan. I definitely didn't answer. The silence wasn't anger. It was clarity. Sometimes the loudest message a man can send is the one he doesn't bother to say out loud. I spent those quiet hours in my cabin by the lake, the same one Elaine and I used to visit in our younger years. The place smelled of cedar and memory, the kind of comfort money can't buy. The Ferrari sat in the small gravel driveway, looking almost out of place against the backdrop of pine trees and still water, but somehow it fit, a symbol of what I'd earned and what I refused to lose again. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Every morning I'd make coffee, throw a log on the fire, and read the same letter Elaine had written to me a few months before she passed. It was creased and yellowing, but her words still cut deep. If the world ever turns its back on you, don't chase it. Build something that makes it turn around. I finally understood what she meant. Building isn't about revenge. It's about showing the world and yourself that you can start again without asking permission. By the fourth day, I went back to work on my small garage, turned it into a workshop again, fixed up some old furniture I'd been meaning to restore, sold a few pieces online, even helped a local widow repair her porch railing. Word spread fast. Mr. Lane's back to fixing things. That felt good. Honest work always does. Then on the fifth day, a familiar sound broke the quiet. A car pulling up outside. I wiped my hands, stepped out, and froze. Sophie was standing there. No makeup, no jewelry, just a worn coat and tear-streaked cheeks. Behind her was an Uber, not her usual luxury SUV. She dismissed it with a small wave and stood in the cold, holding a thermos and a paper bag. I brought coffee, she said, voice shaking. And those muffins you used to like. I didn't say anything at first, just watched her. The daughter who'd once looked at me like I hung the stars, now looking at me like she wasn't sure she deserved to. Finally, I nodded toward the porch. You're just in time for the morning chill. She followed me in, set the muffins on the table, and sat down. For a long minute, neither of us spoke. Only the crackle of the fire filled the air. I don't know where to start, she whispered finally. Start with the truth, I said. It's lighter to carry. Her eyes welled again. I thought I was saving us. When Ethan's business fell apart, I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. I thought the house was just a thing, that you'd understand. I sipped my coffee slowly. I did understand, Sophie. I understood that you valued the world's opinion more than your father's trust. She winced, and the silence between us grew heavy. I saw you that day, she said quietly, in front of the house, with the Ferrari. Everyone did. I didn't even recognize you, Dad. You looked free. I was, I said softly. But freedom isn't about money, Sophie. It's about knowing you don't owe anyone an apology for being yourself. She nodded, looking down at her hands. Ethan left, she said after a moment, packed up and moved to his brother's place in Chicago. He said I embarrassed him, that I made him look small. I couldn't help it, I chuckled. No, Sophie, the truth just caught up with him, that's all. She looked up at me then, eyes red but steady. I sold your home, but I lost mine too, didn't I? That hit harder than I expected. Because for the first time, she wasn't defending her choices. She was admitting her losses. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. You can build another house, I said gently, but a home, that takes something more. She nodded, silent tears falling. I want to earn your trust again, Dad, she whispered. Tell me what to do. I reached for my cup and stared into the rising steam. You can start by remembering where you came from. Then maybe you can start helping others find their way back too. She smiled weakly through the tears. Mom would have said the same thing. She would have, I said, glancing at Elaine's photo on the mantel. She had a habit of being right about everything. For the first time in months, we laughed together. Not the forced laughter of avoidance, but the kind that comes from shared grief and fragile healing. As the fire crackled and snow began to fall outside, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of hers. She'd seen the Ferrari. She'd felt the silence. Now it was time for her to learn that redemption isn't about a second chance. It's about proving you deserve one. Snow fell harder that evening, blanketing the cabin in a quiet silver glow. Sophie sat across from me by the fire, her fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Outside, the red Ferrari gleamed beneath a soft coat of snow. Not a trophy, not a taunt, but a reminder. She'd asked to stay the night and I'd agreed. Not because I wanted to coddle her, but because some lessons are meant to be learned in silence. When I woke the next morning, she was already outside, sweeping snow off the porch in one of my old jackets. I watched her through the window, the way her breath fogged in the cold, how she stopped now and then to look toward the lake. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from her mistakes. She was standing still with them. I stepped outside, pulling on my gloves. Didn't think you remembered how to use a broom, I teased. She smiled faintly. Guess it's never too late to start over. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. We spent the morning in quiet work, her stacking wood while I checked the generator. The simple rhythm of honest labor filled the air. No titles, no pride, just a father and daughter rediscovering what home used to mean. Around noon, she turned to me, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Dad," she said, "I've been thinking. You always used to talk about Mom's idea for a community center, a place where people could rebuild their lives after losing everything. I want to help make that happen." I studied her face, the sincerity in her eyes. "That's not a small promise, Sophie." "I know," she said, steady this time. "I don't want easy anymore, I want right." Something in her tone reminded me of Elaine. That same quiet conviction that used to stop me mid-rant and make me listen. "All right," I said finally. "Then we'll do it together. But this time you'll learn every step, from mixing cement to balancing books." She laughed softly. "Deal." Though I might need a sturdier pair of gloves, days turned into weeks. The workshop became our meeting place, the hum of tools replacing old arguments. Sophie learned to measure twice, cut once. She learned patience, the kind you can't buy, only earn through blisters and splinters. Each night she'd collapse into the same worn chair Elaine once sat in and tell me about new ideas, community kitchens, youth apprenticeships, winter coat drives. Her voice carried that same warmth her mother had when she believed in something bigger than herself. And me? I just listened, because somewhere in the sawdust and laughter I'd realized that my real revenge had never been the Ferrari. It was watching her remember who she used to be before pride got in the way. By the end of the second month, the sign over the newly built center read, "The Lane House, where second chances begin." Sophie hung at herself, hands trembling, tears glistening in the cold. When she turned around, I was leaning against the Ferrari, arms crossed, pretending not to be proud. "You think Mom would like it?" she asked. I smiled. "She'd tell you it's about time you stopped selling houses and started building homes." We laughed, the kind that comes from relief, the kind that sounds a lot like forgiveness. That evening, we stood side by side as the town gathered for the grand opening. People came with casseroles, kids ran through the halls, and somewhere in the noise, Sophie's voice carried through a short speech. She didn't talk about mistakes or apologies. She talked about lessons, about grace, about her father. When she finished, she looked at me through the crowd. Our eyes met, and for the first time in years, no words were needed. Later that night, when everyone had gone, I took one last drive. The Ferrari's engine purred softly against the dark, headlights gliding over empty streets. The radio played one of Elaine's old songs, and for a moment it felt like she was there, in the laughter, in the quiet, in the peace we'd fought so hard to reclaim. I parked by the lake, stepped out and looked up at the stars. Maybe the world doesn't owe us happy endings, but if we listen close enough, it sometimes gives us another beginning. She took my house. She bruised my pride. But in trying to break me, she reminded me who I really was and who she could still become. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. And remember, sometimes losing everything is just the universe's way of handing you the keys to start again.